You might think fake countries are some wild thing made up online. But in early 1820s London, big scams were everywhere. People weren't just selling apps or crazy coins, they were inventing whole countries without leaving their desks. If you looked outside a bank window, you'd see tired clerks, piles of ledgers covered in ink, and rich folks with money they didn't know what to do with. These people had come through years of fighting. The Napoleonic Wars, wild battles, and a map of Europe so torn up it got patched together over and over. At last, peace came, and tons of leftover money sat in London ready to chase any wild idea. The government was still broke and handed out bonds, safe, boring, and about as dry as old bread. Their payoff was so tiny, you'd lose out just buying a train ticket to collect. Bankers and investors wanted more. When easy money gets bored, it does silly things. Soon, everyone started looking over the ocean to Latin America, where wars for freedom filled the news. Suddenly, Londoners cared about Buenos Aires and Lima, places most couldn't point to on a map, but were eager to throw money at. Rumors went around. Gold mines, magic rivers, new countries throwing parties for investors. Even newspapers joined in, printing wild stories about places no one in London had really seen or was sure even existed. This was like the first meme stock wave. South American bonds started trading like lucky raffle tickets. Argentina, Chile, Gran Colombia. If you sounded right and had a cousin with a fake-looking stamp, you could sell shares in a made-up kingdom before the midday meal. Then it got even more clever. News drifted slowly, sometimes taking weeks on a horse, and nobody could just poke their phone to check if a country was real. People believed whoever had the best story, the fanciest book, or the brightest map in the club. In the space between rumors and facts, fortunes appeared out of nowhere. The trick was to have the nerve to tell a big, wild tale, one so far off that nobody could prove you wrong before dinner. Here's Gregor MacGregor. He'd fit right in with those startup guys who talk fast and wave their resumes around, except he didn't push an app, he pushed a whole country. And his background? He'd really fought and gotten hurt in the tough battles of Latin America, riding alongside the famous Simon Bolivar. At parties, people crowded around to hear his wild stories, close calls in the jungle, muskets firing so loud your ears ring, even how he once wrapped a sword cut with only a leaf and pure grit. Gregor told stories that sounded fake, except they weren't. Quote, he'd done all of it. Rich people in Britain couldn't get enough of him. Everyone loved bold heroes, and Gregor had the accent to match with that Scottish roll that made him sound extra tough. The investors heard him talk, and pictured some brave guy straight out of an adventure book. He'd fought in duels, traveled the world, maybe even wrote poems in the middle of a storm. He was nothing like the usual bankers. He felt more like someone from a wild story they all wished they could live. Then, MacGregor went all in. He showed off his fancy title, Cazique of Poyais. That wasn't just some normal title. It made people think of crowns, faraway islands, and secrets no one else knew. Cazique sounded like a royal job, just strange enough that no one could prove it wrong. Gregor grabbed the word from the Caribbean and made it sound important. No one even wondered where it came from or if it was real. By now, he wasn't trying to sell land or papers. He sold people the chance to feel like they were building a brand new world. If you bought what Gregor sold, you gotta call yourself a founder, like you mattered in something huge. For the London investors chasing risk and excitement, that was the thing they wanted most. Gregor didn't need everyone to fall for his stories, just the rich ones with big dreams and bigger wallets. Some scams keep things fuzzy. Poyais did the opposite. This story came with all the details, like someone handing out a full PowerPoint even without a projector. MacGregor told people Poyais was a green, rich land right on the Mosquito Coast, the part of today's Honduras and Nicaragua that touches the sea. He called it a tropical paradise, just waiting for smart, hard-working British people who knew how to build railways and drink tea in the middle of the jungle. Was this legal? On paper, yes. MacGregor said the Mosquito King gave him the land in a special ceremony. This king was so far away and hidden, most British folks had only heard rumors about him. MacGregor even had official papers. They were written in Spanish, covered in fancy wax seals, and looked important. But really, who in London would travel halfway around the world to check? He claimed this was land from a real king. As far as MacGregor was concerned, that proved it wasn't some quick scam. Poyais wasn't just empty woods. The pitch had everything: rich dirt, gold in the rivers, and a shiny new capital called Saint-Mun. Joseph, you guys, he said the city had big, fancy buildings, a working parliament, and streets so tidy you would think someone very important was in charge. He topped up fields of sugar, coffee, and cotton, all ready to make someone rich. The offer wasn't just land. You got a full economy, ready to go. He kept piling on the good stuff: endless resources, sunny weather, riverboats calmly sliding into the harbor, and, importantly, people so eager for British ways they almost begged for Anglican churches and cricket games. Every bit of MacGregor's story had a spot on the map. He drew out maps that looked real even to experts, wrote down exact locations, and gave every detail like he was running a Navy briefing. If you lived far way back when there was no Google and not even good newspapers, those sharp details made everything sound true. People believed it partly because MacGregor went through all the trouble to make it so exact. He wasn't selling somewhere in America. He was selling one marked spot shown in ink and, mostly, nerf. Selling a fake country isn't as simple as drawing squiggly borders on a map and saying, look, a nation. MacGregor knew that an empty fantasy wouldn't work. People wanted something they could see, hold, and show off. He wanted Poyais to feel real, like having real coins or a stamp in your passport. He didn't bother with basic tricks. Instead, he gave Poyais fancy branding, the kind that even tech companies would notice. First, he created a guidebook called Sketch of the Mosquito Shore. It was signed by the made-up Thomas Strangeways, who only existed through his neat signature on every copy. This wasn't just a weak pamphlet. MacGregor packed it with tiny details, rules laid out like British law, made-up population numbers counted down to each farmer, lists of animals written with total certainty. There were maps, charts, lists for trade and shipping. Everything looked like it belonged in a real explorer's trunk. It dared you to doubt it. If there's a whole field guide, could it be fake? But one book wasn't enough to make a dream feel official. MacGregor added more. He wrote a constitution filled with grand-sounding rules copied from other republics. He made a crest that looked so proper you could picture it on an embassy. He ordered medals, uniforms made by real London tailors, and shiny brass buttons so his backers could dress up as Poyaisian officers and brag at rich parties. He even had a national anthem written, ready for pianists to play at fancy dinners if people wanted music with dessert. Last came the biggest touch, real-looking Poyais money. The brand new paper bills and government bonds looked like something kept safe in a royal museum. Actors with jobs as clerks or officers waved around stamped paperwork under candlelight like they worked in a parliament, not a rented room in London. If you wrote in, you got a reply. If you visited, someone greeted you with a badge on their coat and a pile of files. Each token, every uniform, every piece of paper was made just right to make daydreams feel real and to get people to hand over their money before they stopped to ask tough questions that would break the whole scam apart. Gregor MacGregor cooked up a whole fake country using only flyers, fancy-looking papers, and a lot of guts. Once he got things rolling, he didn't hold back. He opened offices in both London and Scotland, so the MacGregor name showed up everywhere. Agents were hired all over, all hoping to make big commissions. These guys walked around with contracts and shiny ads, showing off pictures of golden beaches, bright green hills, and weather so perfect it sounded made up. If you had enough money, you could buy a piece of land 100 acres of your own, like the old-time version of a beach condo that you shared with others. But the land itself wasn't really what got people excited. What really hooked them was a fancy paper that said you were now a landowner in a brand new country. It sounded silly, but these things sold fast. MacGregor didn't just sell fake land. Soon, his new country started selling government bonds, promising huge payoffs that made British investors pay attention. These certificates looked like solid bets, making people think they were buying a piece of a bright future instead of plain IOUs. MacGregor's team didn't only chase after rich people either. They went after workers, former soldiers, whole families who wanted something better than working tough jobs in crowded cities. Poyais looked like a way out. Ads filled the newspapers, telling stories about endless rich land, rivers full of gold, and busy towns that didn't exist. There were piles of pamphlets in people's living rooms, reviews that probably weren't real, and letters from settlers that agents made up themselves. All these stories made the legend of Poyais bigger. Prager was smart with proof. Some people in high society were part of the trick, while others just liked having their names on something popular. People chatted about MacGregor at dinner and in city coffee shops. No one bothered to check if the place was real, and soon folks handed over their life savings, sometimes in rented rooms covered with Poyais flags and fake decorations. Hopeful buyers crowded the offices, said goodbye to friends, and truly believed they were off to a new life and a real chance to start over. When the ships finally left England for this made-up country in the Caribbean, everyone on board carried only their trust, a stack of stamped papers, and hope. Not a single person saw any of the promised paradise before the whole scam crashed hard, while people back in London just drank their coffee and read the gossip, not knowing that MacGregor had just sold the whole fake nation by bluffing. The weirdest thing wasn't that people went along with it. What's wild is how easy it was to get them in. Imagine London in the 1820s. A man in uniform hands you a shiny map of a country you can't find in any schoolbook. What would you do? Why do? Back then, printed stuff felt fancy. If you saw it placed in a nice booklet tied with gold edges, most folks just believed it was real. Poyais even had its own money, flag, and a national song, supposedly really catchy, though hardly anyone heard it. Every piece looked official. MacGregor wasn't hiding out. He was Sir Gregor MacGregor, South American war hero, the guy who fought beside Simon Bolivar in Venezuela. He called himself the Cazique of Poyais. His story spread in army groups, in parliaments, and in coffee shops where young men sat wishing they'd gotten their chance at fame during the Napoleonic Wars. MacGregor put out a big, glossy travel guide full of facts. He didn't just talk about Poyais, he showed it off. He listed fake laws, made-up money, and street names for a city that only lived in his head. It felt a lot like how tech founders do pitches now: show off the dream, trust the details will catch up later. It worked because people were eager for hope. In Britain, lots of folks were trying to move up in the world. Land was hard to get, and most had no chance to own anything unless they went far away, maybe to India or some far colony. Latin America had just gotten out from under Spanish rule, so every newspaper was packed with stories about people making piles of money in Peru, Chile, or Gran Colombia. If you missed out on gold in Chile, no worries. Poyais was the new thing. It wasn't just about money, but a whole new start. People started thinking, why not me? Why not give this a shot in Poyais? Every part of MacGregor's pitch fit right together. Fancy paper made it seem true. His war stories earned trust. Newspapers added buzz. People's wish to change their lives did the rest. Add it all up, and you don't need a big army. You just make trust out of paper and big promises. Only a few people realized, too late, that MacGregor was using their belief as a trick, always just a step ahead of anyone trying to prove him wrong. There's a simple plan most new companies follow. First, you talk up a big idea. Sure, then you gather people who believe in it. After that, you hurry to make the real thing before anyone figures out you don't have much yet. MacGregor did almost the same thing, but instead of a quick first try, his version was sending hundreds of hopeful Scots onto creaky, crowded ships. Their uniforms held promises, and the paperwork just managed to make it look real. Picture the Honduras packet and the Kennersley Castle leaving London. They weren't pirate ships heading for trouble. They were neat merchant ships packed with suitcases, church clothes, harps, tins of pickled herring, boxes of Poyais money, Bibles, and way too much hope. These passengers didn't have anything fit for surviving in the wild. They looked ready for a town meeting, not for building a new country in the middle of thick forest. Letters sent before had described Poyais as a busy place with big streets and a stock market, lots of churches with shiny new windows, and docks busy with trade. They were told it would be London, but in the sunshine. But after long weeks rocking on a sickening sea, the ships reached the spot marked on MacGregor's made-up map. When they dropped anchor, the only thing waiting for them was a hot and buzzing rainforest that made it hard to breathe. There was no city. No homes. Basic, no customs officer. Only the ruins from old British sawmills, a couple of old wooden huts already turning green with mold, and a silence so deep it felt like you could hear their hopes falling apart. The passengers tried to keep their spirits up. They wore their uniforms, counted their Poyais money, waved banners, and stared into the trees like the mayor and the rest of the government might still show up. It was hard to believe the fancy pamphlets and their fancy titles could stop mattering so fast. Some held out, cutting spots for tents in the jungle, hanging up tarps as the rain slammed down, trying to hold on to any piece of home they could. Every day, they waited for the real Poyais to show up, for their new country to appear. But what arrived instead was the truth, along with the mosquitoes, the dream falling apart the same way the hut started to rot, slow at first, then in a rush. That first night, even the people who most believed started to notice things going wrong. Just days later, their city of dreams started falling apart. Bugs, pounding rain every day, and fevers that shook people so badly that some wrote home saying they were bewildering. Malaria hit almost right away. This was nothing like England, where you just get bad weather or muddy roads. Out here, you couldn't hide from clouds of mosquitoes, especially since no one had brought anything made for living in the tropics. There was no pharmacy, so no good shelter at all. Out of the hundreds who came, whole families never made it out of the mosquito-filled clearing where everyone had hoped for a new start. Any medicines they brought ran out in a week. Hunger grew as fast as the fever chills. Some settlers tried to catch fish or dig wells. Most just sat, sweating and confused, eating whatever they could find except for actual answers. Rumors swept around the camp. MacGregor had promised supplies, said he had powerful backers, even said the Royal Navy would come soon. But with each passing day, these promises turned out to be empty. By the second week, their uniforms were falling apart and their printed money, the startup script, was only good for starting small fires. News made it up the coast to Belize, which still belonged to Britain. The officers there were expecting traitors, not half-dead strangers from a place nobody knew. One by one, survivors stumbled and rowed up the coast. The British authorities in Belize put together a rescue. They sent boats to search for anyone still alive. But more than half the people who first set out never came back. Kids, workers, and risk-takers all lost to a dream that was really just a wild promise. One person said, "Coming home felt like walking out of a fever dream with the anthem still playing in my head." But the shock really hit later, when letters from survivors made it back to Britain. The newspapers jumped on the story and printed all the horrible details: money that was now worthless, land that was deadly, and an anthem that only made people angry. Each new letter smashed the Poyais story and showed how a few fake papers had destroyed real lives. Startup had crashed, and what was lost wasn't just money or pride, it was people's lives. Most big money messes try to slip away quietly and hope nobody sees, but not Poyais. The Poyais bonds, once sold as the perfect choice for anyone who wanted to get rich, crashed so hard they turned into scraps of paper. People in London who thought they were buying into the next Singapore soon found out they had a ticket to absolutely nothing. Suddenly, everyone was panicking. The government, which never really liked to make a fuss, started saying it loud and clear: there is no Poyais. The bonds are just play money. If you're packing your bags to leave for your new kingdom, get ready to meet some real quicksand. By then, those bonds were worth less than a used napkin from the pub, and anyone who had been selling them for a nice commission was suddenly nowhere to be found. Some said they were tricked themselves. Others turned up in Scotland, France, or wherever they could hide, showing up with new names and fake beards, or one person ended up somewhere hard to pin down but nice enough. But the story gets stranger. MacGregor still wasn't done. While everyone else tried to explain to their family why all their money was gone, MacGregor just disappeared. When someone finally tried to hand him papers from the court, he was already in Paris charming new investors. It seemed like he had more than 9 lives. He just kept coming back. MacGregor started again with the new fake money, new bonds, and got a fresh group of people dreaming of a perfect place along the Seine. He even got a few tough French bankers interested. These were folks who usually only bet on things like barrels of wine. This time, French police had enough. MacGregor's face was in every newspaper, and his trial was the biggest show in Paris. The courtroom was split. Some people saw MacGregor as some kind of hero, others thought he was just a clever con man. The jury took its time, maybe because France sometimes cheers for underdogs. After he got out of jail, MacGregor still didn't stop. He moved to Central America, where people couldn't decide what he really was: a freedom fighter, a liar, or just the most interesting guy at any party. Maybe he was all three. In the end, the Poyais story still hangs around today. A country made out of made-up papers, wild dreams, and a crowd clapping for a flag, even when the flagpole was really just cardboard. If you look past the shine, the Poyais playbook is really about making up a country from almost nothing. What's wild is that the main tricks still work today. First, you pick a piece of land. Then you find just enough paperwork, a grant, a treaty, maybe some forgotten note in a history book that no one checks too closely. Suddenly, you're not just a random person with a big dream. You're a ruler in hiding. MacGregor didn't just sell daydreams, he tied them to a real spot on the map and used fancy papers covered in squiggly writing in Latin words. He knew it was silly to start with roads, farms, or people. That's hard work. You build the look of a country, make a coat of arms, have your consuls wear uniforms, print clean money, come up with a national song, use a wax stamp for a crest. You talk up cities with cathedrals and opera houses. For government jobs, you pick people right from your dinner parties. You make guidebooks and neat drawings that look nicer than most real towns. Maybe, someday, reality will catch up, if anyone actually visits. Until then, you use other people's trust. Printing shops in London make your papers look fancy. Brokers and banks list Poyaisian bonds. Newspaper editors take your stories and print them. These helpers are honest, but their good name helps the game. MacGregor used the excitement to make money. He charged fees for land, got settlers to pay him like investors, and sold official papers for cash. When people finally arrived in Honduras, all they really found was letterhead. Everything else was just papers, uniforms, and big promises. The scariest thing? This trick works again and again. The world keeps betting on flashy stories that look official. Why? Because once people start believing something is real, it's hard for anyone to let go. The moment you think a pile of papers makes a story real, you step right into the world of modern passport sales. These days, some countries actually sell passports for cash: Malta and St. Kitts give real citizenship to rich buyers and, at least on paper, that's legal. But just next door, you'll find tiny states, made-up nations, and plain old scammers pushing flashy diplomatic documents and high-tech plastic passports you'd never want to show at a real border. For $5,000, you can call yourself the ambassadors from the Grand Duchy of Norwayland or the Sovereign Order of St. T. Internet. They'll send you a shiny ID card, a passport full of fake stamps, your smiling photo beside an odd coat of arms, and a website dripping with gold borders and serious promises. It all looks real right up until border agents give you a blank stare and you have to explain why your fancy badge can't get you anywhere at all. This isn't some small scam. Some people, refugees and discouraged investors, spend big money on these papers only to get stuck in airports with a passport from a country that doesn't show up on Google Maps. Fake document factories in the Balkans, pretend embassies selling diplomatic immunities packs, even a few actual consulates running side gigs. The setup feels familiar. Make some fake seals, build a fancy website, link your site to a trace of legal-sounding history, and wait for worried or hopeful buyers. But now, it's not just folks hoping to dodge taxes or get a better deal. It's people just trying to move or stay safe. Still, the whole game is nothing new. It's just the old country for sale scam, dressed up in nicer clothes. You buy costumes, papers, and an official show sold as a ticket to a new life. Which brings up a tough question. When real forms and clever fakes look almost the same, how can anyone tell which border is true and which one is fresh off a printer? Now, the game gets bigger. This isn't just about buying a passport anymore. There are internet-born countries now, whole new fake worlds you can join. Crypto groups called DAOs, startup nations, and little countries on boats all want to sell you a digital passport for 0.1 Ethereum and a bit of hope. They have fake laws, flags made by someone online, and leaders who use cartoon pictures on Discord. Sometimes they email you a citizenship card as a PDF with a special blockchain code, saying you'll help run the country or get real-world respect in the future. It's a new online version of the old Poyais scam, but this time it lives in the cloud. Then there's seasteading. That's when groups of libertarians, investors, and city planners try to build real metal platforms out in the ocean, floating like their own countries. They make big plans full of shiny towers, city rules, and jobs like Minister of Culture before anyone has even put a single post in the water. The sales pitch comes first. Fancy 3D videos, lists of future parties, even an anthem, all before they set up the plumbing. Startup city plans in places like Honduras or West Africa usually look the same at the start: a website, a launch party, and a rulebook promising a zone of prosperity. But if you look deeper, who's really making sure those rules matter? Who answers when you call the police or need the fire department? Some of these projects are real attempts or weird legal bets, and not everyone is a scam. But shiny logos and websites come faster than real laws. If you have a name, an anthem, and a map, people want to send money to join the next Atlantis. But things change when those dreams hit real dirt, or when the real government arrives with real police and says, "No! Online, anyone can make a flag." Putting it into real ground is a lot harder than just writing a plan or making a pixel flag. So why do we keep falling for it again and again? Why does seeing a coat of arms you've never seen before make some sketchy website seem like the Vatican in your mind? Just a fancy badge and some old Latin words, and suddenly your guard drops. Even the font starts to look more serious. The loading wheel feels like it's working on something important, not just trying to steal your credit card. Okay? It sounds strange, but this is partly built into us. Our brains look for quick clues, and nothing works faster than something that looks official. Show us a seal, and some old part of our mind kicks in, like we're hearing the national anthem. If a marching band walked by, people would want to stand up straight. Psychologists call this institutional mimesis. Most of us can't name 5 things. The president really does, but put him behind a podium with flags and no one doubts he's in charge. We learn what official looks like when we're kids, so those props make us drop our guard. But things get even trickier. The more time, money, or effort you spend, the more stuck you get. You start with a little flyer, then you're collecting certificates, telling your friends, even stitching the flag into your towel. Deej, that makes it harder to walk away. Soon, all those papers and screenshots start to feel heavy, like they matter as much as real stuff. And now, with everything online, you don't need a real castle or a knight to pretend you run your own country. Open Canva, find a stock eagle, start a website. Suddenly, you've got yourself a new kingdom by Monday. We see those official designs and think someone checked them carefully, but the only real check is slow and easy to skip. All the while, our brains trust what looks right, and more people fall for new micronations in the news. The uniforms, rulebooks, and fancy seals? They're just quick add-ons, a shortcut for our need to believe in someone who looks like they're in charge. Now, anyone can make a new country if they have the right graphics and enough nerve. The hard part isn't starting, it's getting everyone else to play along. If you ever get handed a brand new passport from something called the Principality of Northeast Arizona, or someone offers to sell you land on Crypto Island, stop for a second. Don't start showing off your villa online just yet. Here's how you make sure you don't get tricked, step by step. First, ask a question that most people skip. Who else says this country really exists? Don't just look for a logo or a website, look for real paperwork. The best proof is if the United Nations lists it. If that blue flag isn't there, check if any real countries officially recognize it. Check that passport too. Is it made to work with real border machines that scan passports? Now, think bigger. It says, a country is more than just a flag and a song. Who's running it? Is there an office that collects taxes? Is there a real police force? Is there a court that can actually make someone obey? Can you find their rules written down anywhere, or is it just stuff people share online? Real governments give you boring PDFs to read, not just jokes or pretty pictures. Next up, check their records. Is there a public list of who owns which land? Good. Now see if that matches up with satellite maps. Is there a real list of companies, or does every address point to a PO box in Delaware? Can you find the money regulator on an official list, or see if they have banking codes like SWIFT or BIC? If they don't have those, it's probably not a real country, just a bunch of people handing out fake business cards. Try some basic detective work online. When did their website show up and who owns it? Does their embassy sit at a real street address, or is it just a temporary office? Can you find real financial statements, or only shiny charts with big numbers? Did an outside reporter ever go there in person, or are all the news stories written by the same group? Watch out for easy-to-spot warning signs. If they want you to pay for citizenship right now and set a timer, something's off. If every single page brags about treaties but nobody real has signed them, or if their anthem sounds like a free phone ringtone, walk away. If their whole pitch is about moving fast, get out of there even faster. This is where things really start to cost people. First, Poyais settlers lost everything chasing Gregor MacGregor's promises. They trusted a man with a fancy name and some smooth talk, thinking they'd find a new home. They sold their houses, used all their money, and left everything behind because the ad said paradise was waiting. But when they got there was no gold, no real streets, just jungle, some handed-out uniforms, and a growing fear. It's like getting off a ship ready for a party, but all you get is a swarm of mosquitoes and piles of mud. That's not just a rough arrival, it's a shock to the system. The real price wasn't just money. They lost their futures. Whole families disappeared, all from one man's scam. Now people are still getting tricked, just in new ways. Today's fake offer isn't tropical land. It's a smooth website or a digital passport. Sure, there's no malaria, but good luck telling that to someone who's lost all their savings. Modern scammers talk up dream startups with official-sounding words. They promise you can buy citizenship or shape your own future online. They say you'll live in the cloud, leaving all worries behind. But what happens is the same old pain. Now it's years wasted fighting paperwork, or that sick feeling when you realize your big plan was just a trick that stole your money and time. Even the real programs, the ones by the rules, get hit. If you're a refugee, someone without a country or running from a war, you find that every border guard looks at you like you might be lying. All because some scammers made trust harder to find. When everyone decides what's real just by looking at a logo or a brand, it only takes one crook to wreck a good idea for years. So now you have to wonder, what does real, true citizenship even look like? If a nice website can hide a scam, how do we stop the next fake dream? These risks are real. When you sign up for something that sounds too good, you could be putting your whole self on the